Tales from Juthos, Part 6. From across her desk in the cavern's rookery tower, the dockmaster dismissed the wheezing messenger with an imperious hand. She did so enjoy watching them try to maintain composure after running up all those stairs. She tapped a nail against her glass, summoning a servant to her side to pour another drink, keeping the rest of the assembled men waiting as she idly leaned back in her chair and pretended to study the city map on the wall. Finally, she removed her glasses and set them in an ornate case, clicked her tongue, rapped her fingers on the desk, and ordained to look at them. "I see. So it is quite as bad as I thought. Follow them. Find out who they are after, and do not, and I shall repeat myself, do not let anything happen to this alleged summoner. They are far too valuable as a potential informant. Understood?" There were 5 of them in the room with her, each holding their helmets beneath their left arm and standing with straight backs and their heels together. These were the captains of her port authority. Their chests were emblazoned with the crowned half-sun of Mentis' house set against the two-toned ship's wheel of the port beneath the mountain. Having been summoned to the rookery tower at this late hour, each of them still had bags beneath their reddened eyes, and they were struggling to disguise the occasional urges to yawn. Stepping forwards, the most senior of the assembled beat his hand against his helmet, and then to his chest. "Understood, my dockmaster. And what are your instructions regarding Miss Dravenfall? If reports are to be believed, she has violated the terms of her placement here. We will need to contain her promptly after the situation is resolved and issue the people some form of explanation." This was Wymark Rand, a short one for a human by all accounts and in his 53rd year. Time had left his face wrinkled and creased, and without a single hair upon the top of his head, though in private conversations Ezradus has heard he liked to blame her for that. However, for all that he had lost from his scalp, he more than made up for in his impressive white moustache. A bold specimen of facial furniture that stuck out beyond the silhouette of his cheeks and beyond the tips of his ears. Captain Whiteyard was the nickname this had earned for him, after the yards of a ship's mast. However, Ezradus knew that he was not beyond encouraging other interpretations. "Oh, my dear pet, it is a shame, isn't it? Between her and Harold, I rather fancy the idea of the cavern's criminals living in fear of my monstrous menagerie." Harold was the name she had given her great Skulgarum, the winged beast that was now resting on the top of the tower 2 floors above them. It had become fashionable in the capital in recent years for powerful women who did not wish to marry to proclaim themselves wedded to exotic beasts. The more outlandish the pairing, the better. Ezradus loved this new trend. Both foreigners and suitors alike found it so intimidating. "No, we'll just have to make her disappear somehow, I suppose. Just try not to kill her anywhere too public, or else she might change back. I don't want people putting that story together and causing me headaches." Given the many parties interested in the Dravenfall family, Angela's identity was a closely held secret. Few outside of this room were trusted with it, and Ezradus didn't doubt that amongst those select few not everyone agreed with the wisdom of keeping her here, a suspicion confirmed by the suggestion of relief on the few of her captains' faces as she stated these instructions. Not that she cared. Angie and her companion had more than returned their investment, and now she could die, bringing Ezradus to even greater heights. It was a shame, though. She had enjoyed teasing her pet so much. Indeed, it was something that she had begun to take a certain pride in. Time and time again she had devised new humiliations for the girl to endure, only for her to come right back along to the rookery. Ezradus smiled. Sweet little Angie really was a dog. She had often mused upon what her family must have done to bring her to such a sorry state. Her chamber guards said that she had occasionally cried out the name Julius in her sleep. Maybe if everything went to plan, Ezradus might be able to one day meet him. He sounded intriguing. "And what of Flint Braid?" Apparently 2 of his men were seen following Silden into the tavern where Miss Dravenfall broke our agreement. Doubtless he'll have his underlings documenting damages incurred during these affairs." Despite herself, Ezradis felt her brow twitch in irritation as another of her captains spoke. Flintbraid was the head of Gren's city guard. Between him, Ezradis, and occasionally the Dawn Ordinator up in the garrison, the 3 of them represented the Crown's law enforcement within the city. The Ordinator was generally too busy with the war effort to spoil the Dockmaster's fun, but that bastard of a dwarf in the city hall was a constant thorn in her side. He had never liked the idea of humans being in positions of authority within dwarven holds, and liked Ezradis and her methods even less. As soon as she had returned from Silden's ship with the news that devils were involved, she had sent 1 or 2 of her more trusted underlings to seek out anyone doing time for forgery within her prison. With any luck, if her first plan failed, she might be able to implement Flintbraid in the summoning. Maybe even have him dismissed from duty for meddling in Mentis's plans. Just a bit of false evidence in the traitor magician's house and she'd be golden. Though she would have to be sure it was the dwarf's own men who discovered it, of course. Which would mean issuing funny orders and making sure people didn't get in and, well, the last thing she needed was to leave a trail. Not that it would be the first time she'd tried to do something along these lines, of course. She was confident she could do it. After all, she would have to do something, as she simply couldn't stand the idea of him thinking that she was losing her edge, or worse, him thinking she was getting any less dedicated in her hatred of him. It was actually bothering her that her main and primary plan was going so well. It was almost like Flintbraid was growing some sort of confidence in her. She had requested the city guard lend their men to the defense of the gnomes and caravan, in paper, of course, citing that in this time of crisis it wouldn't do to be short of staff on the waterfront. The threat of foreign spies leaving and entering via the massive cavern harbour was a very real one. She had even gone so far as to risk a comment about the threats at the moment being drawn from the outside, rather than from within our ranks. Surely that would have been enough to elicit at least some form of suspicion. Then again, she wouldn't like to give the man too much credit. She wondered if the caravan had been attacked yet. It had been a simple matter to pay a group of the docks gnomes and halfling beggars to board the carriages in the foreigners' stead. They certainly looked the part. The switch around had gone very smoothly, and while she doubted Silden had put together the true reasoning behind her subterfuge, this sort of ploy was almost certainly something the smuggler had done in the past. She would have to fill him in on what happened to them after they recovered the bodies. Whilst the giant of a man put up a gruff exterior, Ezradis was shrewd enough to know there was a soft centre in there somewhere. Why else would he be so readily prepared to risk a job for the Crown so his crew could retire? A hardened captain would have laughed at the proposition. No matter what he let on, she was sure he would be devastated, and she very much enjoyed crushing smugglers. She swirled her glass idly. "I don't suppose you think there is any chance we could pressure the patrons into signing a testimony that was the 2 guardsmen who set her off? It would be terribly convenient if that was his fault as well. Any thoughts on those ends, Captain Aderill?" Ezradis was addressing one of the taller members of the meeting, and certainly one of the youngest. Aderill was an agonizingly attractive fellow. In fact, he was so angular and becoming that it seemed almost too good to be true. Thankfully, in more ways than one, it was. Ezradis very much liked that about him. Unfortunately, there were too many within the assembled for us to reliably keep track and tie up any loose ends. He sounded legitimately regretful, the poor dear. She made a note to find him something fun to do soon. Maybe she'd put him in charge of escorting back any prisoners they took from the Runner's Cove raid they'd been planning recently. She'd been looking forward to that. From what I gather, however, there was apparently some confusion as to how the altercation started. Maybe we could frame it that Miss Dravenfall ingested some form of poison that the guardsman had intended for Silden. It'd be believable enough to claim that this is why she lost control of her condition, I would say. The other captains looked at Adoril with mixed expressions of surprise and disgust, their demeanour noticeably uncomfortable. Initially, Ezradus had brought him on board just to spite the rest of the old fools with his youth. But as time went on, she had found him to be delightfully malleable. The dockmaster interlaced the fingers of each of her delicate hands in front of her head quite still, her eyes flicking back and forth in her thought. "Do you know, I don't hate that idea. But really, Adoril, you must try to grasp some level of nuance. I fear our dear Wymark's stash just grew 3 shades whiter." The young captain smiled, his sharp eyes shooting between both her and his older counterpart. "My apologies, Dockmaster." Dogan was sick with worry. His mind kept running over and over all of the horrible possibilities of what might happen to him next. Angie would probably be killed, that's for sure, unless they could get her out of here. Then maybe he would be killed. Or maybe this bastard sea captain would kill him. Or maybe they'd all survive and he would have to flee the city with no money or goods and he'd be a feast for the harpies by the next morning. And then of course he had to consider what would happen if Angie actually came across a devil. Sure, he thought to himself, trying desperately to calm himself down. This Sildon may have fought these things before, but parts of him are missing. His keen ears could hear the incessant beat of the wooden appendage slamming against the floor of the captain's boot. The powerful man pushing himself forward in pursuit of the wolf Angie thing as fast as his legs and lungs could carry him. Though it was clear he was tiring. An extended sprint around the sloping streets of Gren was difficult for any man, let alone one with a missing limb. He couldn't imagine it was anything other than painful. "Rat! Which way am I headed?" shouted the man through laboured breath. He didn't know his way around the city and was relying on the Seyrat's ears not to lose track of the lycanthrope. Travelling on all fours, she was far faster than they were. "Give me a moment," Dogan called from his back. Screwing his eyes shut, he pulled himself close to Sildon's coat, his whole body tensing as he tried his best to calm himself and focus. He could hear people rushing into the streets to see what was going on. Men and women calling for their children to join them at their sides. A kettle was boiling. Someone nearby was carving, was that beech? Ash? He could hear soft shoes running behind one of the houses, a broken shutter. He could hear the metallic clatter of weaponry being passed about, orders being yelled to tired men, and then, eventually, somewhere, 4 large clawed feet, rapping against the stone paving, panting, and a loudly slathering jaw. Dogan pulled himself up and closer to the captain's ear. "Take a left at the baker's. She's headed up towards the garrison and stay off the main street. You'll be able to slip through the dwarven back tunnels if you keep your head down. It sounds like more guards are coming." The giant man swore under his breath. "It'll be fine, I promise. The dwarves always build things far larger than they need to, and there'll be more places to hide." Dogan had unfortunately had a lot of experience with the back alleys and the wind tunnels of Gren. To keep the underground city supplied with enough air for its inhabitants to reside there in comfort, the dwarves had dug many airways and chimneys that kept the winds moving through the long tunnels and residential areas. Indeed, word was that from as far away as Hasgau on the Eastern Sea, you could occasionally make out the mouthpieces of these enormous vents, standing like tall towers on the mountain. As the city expanded, and certainly now with all the refugees pouring in from the southern parts of the kingdom, many of these tunnels began to serve as something of a slum. For a long time, those slums had been Dogan's home. A member of the city guard rounded the corner and into their path just ahead of them. He had a cudgel in his hands and a torch held above his head. As he spotted the 2 pursuants, the guard's eyes opened wide in fear, and he cried out as the giant bore down upon him. Ducking down, Sildon took a panicked blow to his shoulder before backhanding the man into the wall and continuing to run. Dogan's fingers strained as they dug into the captain's coat in an effort to keep himself from falling off. Looking back along the path, The Seyrat watched as the poor guardsman struggled to his feet and called out in alarm. Grunting in pain, Sildon yelled back over his shoulder. "I thought you said you could hear him coming. We'll not make it against a ruddy troop of them." Damn it. With the amount of noise going on in the city due to Angie's hunt, he was missing things. It was like trying to pick out shapes in murky waters. He could hear so much chatter, so many people shouting, so many scared children and slamming doors. Beyond that, his own mind was racing too. He needed to focus. Ignore the bakers. Head to the fountain and drop over the handrail to the lower street. There's a staircase there that will lead us to a broken grate in the wall. Krullig slapped his shoulder with a massive hand right next to Dogan's head. "Oi! Are you listening to me? Can you hear them coming or not?" The captain was clearly getting angry. "It's loud, okay. I need to get somewhere quieter. Just trust me, I've done this before." Dogan tried to hold contacts with Krullig's steely eye for as long as he dared, hoping beyond hope that his ears didn't betray how nervous he really was. Whatever front he managed to put on, it seemed to do just about enough. The captain grunted and charged past the bakers. He was having to trust Dogan a lot, and the Seyrat couldn't blame him for being agitated at the situation. Merchants who had drawn their carts away from the werewolf's path were gathered and calling out to the masses tales of a terrible beast of long limb and claw. From his elevated position upon Sildon's back, Dogan could see deep tears in the fabric of a wagon roof that was being shown off by its owner and drawing frightened speculation from onlookers. Close to the centre of the masses, several men strained their arms and backs as they attempted to calm terrified pack beasts by the central fountain. "Whoa there! You like to cause harm running about like that?" An elderly dwarf blocked their path, shepherding a number of children with him. Dogan could hear cries from the summoned guards not far behind them. He could feel the muscles in Sildon's back and shoulders tense in rage as he was driven to a staggering halt. Unable to easily slow himself on his prosthetic leg, his maddened eyes bored into Dogan from over his shoulder. "Rat, I thought you said that." Sildon was interrupted mid-sentence by the Seyrat D climbing atop his head. Dogan steadied a foot against the captain's shoulder and a knee against his head, as he dared to reach up, cup his hands to his mouth, and shout, "Run! Flee! The beast is coming!" He had a split second to see the inception of panic within the crowd before he felt a strong hand grasp his leg. His world span upside down. Held aloft in front of a furious-looking captain, Dogan's ears dangled down below him at full sail, like the wings of an arrow-struck pheasant. His eyes blurred as he was overcome with a sensation, suddenly keenly aware of the speed at which the giant's blood was pumping. He couldn't have his ears open at a time like this. Then, the screaming started. The Seyrat shrieked in pain, and frantic hands moved to his head, desperately trying to close over his ears as the cacophony of dread threatened to madden him. It was all he could do to cry out to Sildon, "Please, I need to get somewhere quiet, please." One of the city guards behind them called out and started to ring a warning bell. The sensation was almost excruciating. He was flung about as the captain was hit by something, flinched and grunted in pain. Then they were moving again. Dogan's wailing caught short as his form was brought close and held firmly against Sildon's frame. Mercifully, the man had committed his other hand to covering both sides of the Seyrat's head, one ear to his chest and the other to the coarse skin of his enormous hand. All he could do to regain himself now was focus on the 3 drums of the captain's feet, heart, and breath. One of the drums stopped for a while, and wind coursed through Dogan's fur. It was only for a moment, but it was enough that he opened his eyes again, if only briefly, to see what was nothing more than the hem of the captain's coat. Angie was all alone now. There was no way he would catch up with her. Not whilst he was like this. He should have warned this man what he was going to do. He should have concentrated. He shouldn't have ever suggested they try this idea. What was he thinking? That they would somehow be able to match pace with her? One Seyrat and a man with a missing leg. He was so stupid. The slam of the captain hitting the floor of the underpass caused Dogan to close his eyes and grit his teeth once again. There was a huge grunt of pain from the captain, and he staggered to and fro for a moment to recover from the shock to his amputated limb. It sounded like he was going to say something, but all that came out were weak gasps. The man's left arm notably sagging, and Dogan could feel the strength ebbing from his hold. This was useless. And yet, the captain was moving again, upwards this time. The steady increments of steps. Then, there was a cool breeze again, as wind caressed his body. The captain shifted Dogan in his arms, and his body hunched over, exposing the Seratzir for just a moment. An echo. The soft howl of the wind tunnels. So this would be the price of my stupidity, Dogan thought. I'm going home.